Hey guys, tonight we drift into the salt-laced shadows of western Sicily, where the waves don't just kiss the shore, they keep secrets for decades. Imagine this: an old man with sea-weathered eyes standing barefoot on the docks of Marsala, his coat barely fluttering in the hush of the wind. He watches the tide come in like he's waiting for a message. The seagulls avoid him. The fishermen nod and keep their eyes low. You wouldn't guess it, but this man once controlled the flow of hashish from Morocco to Milan with the same ease most men brew coffee. He was called many things: Don Mariano, the Salt King, the sea's shadow. But his real power came not from how loudly he ordered, but how silently he made things happen. And tonight, we're diving into the full tide of his story. But fair warning, this isn't a flashy gangster flick. No neon-lit car chases, no slow-motion shootouts, just tides, time, and a quiet man who rose by reading the wind better than anyone else. You probably wouldn't survive a day in his Marsala, not because of bullets, but because of how quickly you'd vanish without a ripple. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're with me tonight, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He's 10 years old the first time Mariano Agate tastes salt thick enough to numb his tongue. The docks of Marsala have their own gravity, and the barefoot boy with oversized trousers follows it every morning. His father's already out, maybe laying nets, maybe laying bets, and his mother pretends not to notice he's left again without breakfast. Marsala in the late 1930s isn't a place of clamor. It's all stone streets, hard bread, and soft voices. Even the dogs don't bark unless they have something important to say. And young Mariano, he's got that same quiet in him. Not shy, not fearful, just quiet. Like the sea, like something that waits. He hangs around the fishing boats, not helping, not stealing, just watching. The older men occasionally toss him a fish too small to sell or a crust of bread rubbed with garlic. In return, Mariano listens. He becomes a repository of every whispered frustration and every half-suspicion about whose catch seemed too lucky that week. He learns that information moves faster than sailboats and cuts deeper than hooks. Some say his first deal comes at age 12. It's not drugs or even knives. It's sardines, several kilos that fell off a delivery meant for a restaurant up the coast. He sells them back to the same place 3 days later, having let the smell fade with seawater and prayer. The restaurant chef laughs when he sees him again, but pays anyway. That's how you treat a boy who understands scarcity and timing. Even at that age, Mariano doesn't run. He walks everywhere like he belongs there. And by the time he's 16, people talk about him as if he were older. The lines of his face don't move when he hears about a fight, or when someone pulls a knife over territory. Some people freeze under pressure. Mariano evaporates into silence. You won't see him for days, and when you do, the problem is solved or buried. There's an old man near the salt pans, Don Pepino. He's not a Don like Mariano will become. He's just one of those ageless creatures who seems to live off brine and rumor. He watches the boy and mutters something one day as Mariano walks by. The sea takes what it wants, but it always leaves something behind. Mariano stops, says nothing, just nods. He understands, even if he doesn't know what yet. The sea becomes his teacher, not school. He never really returns after 13. What's the point? The tides don't test you on dates or dead kings. They test whether you know when to leave, when to anchor, and when to let the storm pass without trying to outrun it. And he learns all of that. The first time he watches a man die, it's not dramatic. A fight over a woman. The man's head hits a stone corner. The blood is immediate, but quiet. Mariano doesn't look away. He doesn't run. He just notes who's holding the bottle, who steps away first, and who says nothing when the police come. That's the day someone important notices him, an older cousin with darker business on his hands. He invites Mariano to carry a box to a friend. Nothing illegal, technically, but the boy knows better. Still, he delivers it, doesn't open it, doesn't ask. When the man opens it in Palermo and finds exactly what he expected, an envelope and a switchblade, he laughs and says, "This one listens to the wind." Mariano's reputation grows quietly. He becomes the kind of person people say might know someone when they need something that's hard to find. Like fuel when the shortages hit. Like American cigarettes when the port inspectors are looking the other way. He never brags. He never haggles. His price is always fair, but final. And he always pays his debts early. By 19, he's got 3 fishing boats. Not in his name, of course. But everyone knows who controls them. They don't make their money from tuna. Not anymore. At night, they drift a little too far out. Just close enough to greet another boat from a different continent. Someone in Trapani tells him he's too young to be acting like a don. Mariano just smiles and doesn't answer. Because the truth is, he's not acting. He's just getting started. The sea continues to lap at the edge of his story. Every choice he makes seems measured in tides. He avoids flashy moves. He invests in patience. If another man gets loud, Mariano waits for the wave to crash. Then he moves in, silent as the undertow. Somewhere along the way, an older fisherman tells a story about a king who ruled without speaking a word for years. Mariano listens, and later, when someone asks him how he kept control over so many men without raising his voice, he says only, "The ocean never shouts." And in Marsala, everyone understands exactly what he means. The nets hang like ghosts over the water, their shadows rippling across the old docks of Marsala. Mariano watches them sway in the breeze, salt drying on the ropes like frost. He's 15 now, and the sea has already started to whisper more than just weather forecasts. It speaks in opportunity. One crate off the books, one barrel hidden deeper in the hold, one handshake too long at a quiet table behind the cantina. And Mariano listens. The fishermen don't speak of him as a boy anymore. They nod when he walks past, sometimes offering a short ragazzo, though it lacks the usual tone of dismissal. There's something in his walk now, in the way he pauses before turning a corner or crossing a threshold, like he already knows what's waiting. He doesn't bluff, doesn't threaten, but every now and then, someone who's late on a payment finds their boat slashed loose from its moorings, or their nets tangled beyond repair. No one ever sees who does it, and Mariano always offers a kind smile and a new rope the next day. His first real deal doesn't come through Sicily at all. It comes from Tunisia. There's a merchant, greasy and smooth, always puffing on thin black cigars, who needs a small favor. He wants his crates moved past customs. They're labeled as olives, but everyone knows olives don't rattle when you shake the box. Mariano arranges it. 3 fishermen, 2 crates, One new set of inspectors recently gifted a side of salted lamb and a few lira in a sealed envelope. The crates get through, the merchant pays, and Mariano buys his mother new shoes. He doesn't tell her where the money comes from. She doesn't ask. A few weeks later, the merchant sends word. He needs someone trustworthy. Not loyal, trustworthy, he emphasizes. There's a difference. Mariano understands. Loyalty can be bought. Trust requires something deeper. The merchant offers more work, this time out of Trapani. The boy agrees, but keeps a distance. He has no desire to become anyone's errand boy. Instead, he watches. In Trapani, he meets Girolamo, a man with an eye like a crow and hands that never stop moving. Girolamo works for people who don't have names, only initials whispered in dim rooms. He's dangerous, but polite. He watches Mariano the same way Mariano watches him, and eventually, they speak. "You don't drink," Girolamo says one night, pouring himself a measure of grappa in the back of a warehouse. "I don't need to forget anything yet," Mariano replies. Girolamo grins. Smart, dangerous, but smart. They begin working together. Small shipments at first. Smuggled silks. Unmarked liquor. Eventually, something heavier. Guns, wrapped in burlap and silence. Mariano never touches them, never holds one, but he knows the weight. He knows the silence they carry. He returns to Marsala often, but never empty-handed. He brings home rare herbs, a new radio, once even a golden necklace his sister never dares to wear outside. The town watches him shift. He's still polite, still soft-spoken, but his eyes now carry weight, like stones pulled from deep water. It's around this time he meets the man who changes everything, Don Vincenzo, an old figure in the western Sicilian landscape, quiet, tired, respected. He sees something in Mariano that reminds him of a younger version of himself, back before the politics, before Palermo swallowed men whole. They speak often, never long, never loudly, but Vincenzo begins to introduce him to men with medals under their jackets, to priests who keep confessions longer than they should, to bankers who understand how to hide wealth beneath grapevines and glass bottles. And all the while, Mariano keeps dealing, keeps listening, keeps walking the line between legitimate commerce and midnight whispers. He learns the rhythm of Marsala's underworld. It doesn't roar like Palermo. It hums, low and steady. Everything depends on appearances. A man might own a vineyard, but ship rifles through the same crates. A woman might run a bakery, but count laundered cash beneath bags of flour. Mariano never judges. He just notices. His operations begin to spread, not because he forces them, but because others trust him more than they trust their own cousins. He always delivers, never brags, and he's quick to forgive. Once. The second time, the ocean usually takes something. A rival appears briefly, a cocky upstart from Mazzara del Valle, young, flashy, talks too much, tries to undercut Mariano's prices. He gets a few local vendors to flip. Mariano doesn't react. Instead, he sends a bottle of wine to the upstart's table one evening, along with a note. "Enjoy the vintage. The vines remember everything." 2 weeks later, the upstart vanishes. Some say he left for Rome. Others say his car was found parked too close to the surf. Mariano never comments. He begins investing in fishing boats, not just for cover, but for pride. He ensures they run clean, hire locals, pay fairly. He earns real respect this way, even from those who suspect he's more than a simple businessman. By 22, he controls most of the coastline commerce west of Trapani. Not officially. On paper, He's just a humble importer-exporter with a love of sea bream and dry wine. But everyone knows who to call if they want something moved. Quietly, quickly, without questions. One night, over a plate of grilled octopus, Don Vincenzo leans toward him. "You're not like the others," the old Don says. Mariano raises an eyebrow. "You don't want to be king." "I want to be the tide," Mariano replies. The old Don nods once and never questions him again. And so he rises, not with gunshots or headlines, but with consistency. Like the tide, like the wind, like salt that corrodes even stone, given enough time. The tide teaches what school never could: how to wait, how to pull back before you surge forward. Mariano Agate, still in his early 20s, adopts this lesson into everything. While others in Sicily's underworld posture like roosters, he drifts just beneath the surface, eyes always scanning the horizon. His closest circle isn't made of muscle, it's made of memory. Men who remember debts, who recall favors, who don't need to be reminded twice. Mariano's inner crew aren't loyal out of fear. They're loyal because he never makes them choose between pride and survival. They get paid before asking. Their families eat well. If someone falls ill, there's a doctor waiting at the door. Quietly arranged. Still, not all admire his calm approach. Some think he lacks fire. In Palermo, younger dons begin to rise with fury. Blood in the streets, bombs under car seats. Rina, Provenzano. Names beginning to gain weight in hushed conversations. They operate with war in their mouths. Mariano operates with patience in his pocket. He begins buying up old warehouses along the coast, always under someone else's name. No flashy signatures, no paper trails leading back. But if you map them out, they form a chain, perfect for moving goods from dock to town to train line. What those goods are changes by season. Wine, citrus, sometimes fabrics. Other times, rifles, hashish, or cash wrapped in burlap like last week's catch. One of these buildings houses his unofficial office. It's nothing special, just a second-floor room with a window overlooking the salt pans. There's always a kettle boiling, always a file on the desk, no phone. He doesn't trust the wires. Visitors come through back staircases and leave by separate exits. A local postman delivers blank envelopes daily. Most go unopened. The ones Mariano reads, he burns after memorizing. He never writes replies. His answers are always sent in the form of shipments or silence. It's in this room that he meets the Moroccan, tall, elegant, always smelling faintly of clove and cedar. The Moroccan brings word of a new opportunity: hashish, pressed tight into bricks and packed into barrels of anchovies. The route is delicate. Tunisia to Sicily, Sicily to Naples, Naples to Milan. From there, trucks into France. A perfect chain, if each link holds. Mariano doesn't say yes, he just listens. A week later, a test run. One boat, one barrel. Delivered to a port warehouse Mariano doesn't own but very much controls. No one speaks. The fisherman receives double his usual wage. The Moroccan receives confirmation. The chain holds. This marks the start of something enormous, an international route few others dare to try. Most of the Palermo dons fight each other tooth and claw for control over city corners. Mariano skips the city entirely. He thinks like the ocean, wide, constant, unseen when necessary. Of course, this doesn't go unnoticed. Trapani's prefect begins asking questions. A few curious officers appear near the docks more often. Mariano adjusts. He donates money to a local church, funds repairs to a damaged school roof. sends fresh tuna to the mayor's wife. Then, the questions stop. There's one officer, though, Inspector Alessio. Young, clean-shaven, believes in law like some men believe in saints. He approaches Mariano directly one afternoon, standing at the edge of a fish market. "You've never been arrested," Alessio says. "I've never been guilty," Mariano replies with a smile. Alessio leans in. "I will find something, eventually." "Then I hope you find peace too," Mariano says gently. The inspector walks away unsatisfied. Meanwhile, Mariano begins mentoring a few younger men. Not family, not blood, but loyal. One of them, Enzo, is brash, wants quick success. Mariano gives him small tasks, delivering crates, timing shipments. But he watches Enzo closely. The boy moves like a storm, and Mariano knows storms break things. One night, Enzo goes too far, threatens a customs agent's nephew over a delay. The agent panics, whispers reach Rome. Mariano acts before the wave crests. He invites Enzo to dinner. The meal is quiet. Cuttlefish stew, hard bread, lemon wine. "You don't speak for me," Mariano says. Enzo nods but doesn't apologize. "You won't speak for anyone again." The next morning, Enzo boards a boat for Libya. No one hears from him again. This act echoes throughout the region. Not because of violence, but because of restraint. Mariano doesn't kill the boy. He removes him. Cleanly, quietly. No blood, just absence. And in the world, Mariano rules. Absence speaks loudest. Many people still think that this decision is what elevated him from a respected smuggler to a feared don. So what do you think? Is true power measured by how many enemies you make, or how easily you erase them? Back in Marsala, life continues in its old rhythms. Fishermen mend nets, children chase stray cats. But there's a new kind of order. Crime doesn't disappear, but it obeys. When disputes arise, Mariano's name is invoked before knives are drawn. He becomes the salt in every conversation, unseen, but undeniable. At home, he keeps to habits. Early mornings, black coffee, long walks by the sea. He owns a villa now, modest by Don standards. Olive trees line the path. The windows are narrow. Security is invisible, but absolute. Visitors often expect gold, velvet, perhaps paintings of saints. Instead, they find seashells on the mantel and a map of wind currents on the wall. He's a Don, yes. But he's not trying to be Caesar. He's trying to be the tide, and tides, as always, return. The wind comes in low across the salt flats, carrying with it the scent of brine and burnt sugar from a bakery 2 streets inland. Mariano walks with his hands behind his back, head tilted just enough to track the rhythm of the waves without appearing to care. At 26, he's still trim, still quiet, still wearing the same kind of muted jackets he wore at 16. Only now, men clear his path before he arrives. The townspeople say little, but they notice everything. The bakery no longer worries about late payments from the dock workers. Mariano took care of that. A landlord who raised rents too sharply found his windows broken and his wallet missing, then received a sealed envelope with the exact amount of difference, plus interest. The message was clear: play fair or be played out. In the cafes and fish markets, people speak of him like weather. Not good, not bad, just present. A fact of nature. You plan around it. You don't challenge the tide. You learn when it's rising. And so, with time and subtle force, Mariano begins to shape not just deals, but behavior. He creates a rhythm. Goods flow in from North Africa, Spain, and occasionally Croatia. Some legal, some less so, but always timed, always clean. He avoids violence like others avoid taxes, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Blood stains more than just the floor. It stains memory. And Mariano prefers people to remember his face with respect, not revenge. Yet there's something else stirring. Beyond Marsala, beyond Sicily. In Palermo, the Corleonesi are rising fast. Led by Salvatore Riina and his inner circle, they begin to bring a new kind of rule. Loud, fast, brutal. Riina doesn't wait for opportunity. He breaks down the door and installs his own. Mariano watches from afar. He knows Riina. Everyone does. But they've never worked directly. Their styles clash like storm and still water. Riina's world is made of bombs and headlines. Mariano's is made of shadows and tides. One evening, in a villa just outside of Alcamo, a gathering is held. Not official, not documented, just a few names from different provinces, cups of red wine, small talk about imports, taxes, trucks. Then Riina speaks. "We need Sicily," he says. "All of it. Not piece by piece, whole." Mariano sips his drink and remains silent. Later, someone approaches him on the patio. A man from Catania, nervous and sweating. "You didn't answer him," the man whispers. "I wasn't asked a question," Mariano replies. That answer echoes. He doesn't resist the Corleonesi. He simply doesn't rush to join. It's a dangerous stance. But Mariano plays a long game. He makes minor adjustments. A route here, a new contact there, a few quiet meetings with neutral factions. He prepares for tides to shift. Meanwhile, back in Marsala, his roots deepen. He acquires a vineyard. Not for wine, but for storage. Barrels marked for aging conceal more than just grapes. Beneath the fields, a network of tunnels once used by resistance fighters is quietly reinforced. Few know it exists. Fewer know how to enter. He also starts buying debt. Quietly. A shopkeeper in Mazzara del Vallo misses 3 months' payments. Mariano covers it, then sends a man with a soft voice and a kind smile to help manage things. A truck driver loses a shipment. Mariano replaces it before sunrise, then asks if he might use the man's route next month. Piece by piece, he becomes necessary. He doesn't hold power in the traditional sense. He doesn't bark orders or sit on thrones. But like the sea, his presence is inescapable. Try to run a port without him, and goods don't move. Try to sell hashish in his radius, and your supplier vanishes. Try to ignore him, and one day, your boats don't return. And yet, he's not feared like Riina. He's something else. One judge in Palermo, reviewing a quiet case about import violations, stares at the paperwork and mutters to himself, "This man is more ghost than gangster." Another official in Rome receives a dossier with Mariano's name. Most of it is blank. No arrests, no convictions, no wiretaps. Just rumor. So the judge travels to Marsala. He walks the streets, visits the salt flats, eats lunch at a quiet restaurant with perfect views of the coast. At the end of his visit, he sends no reports. He simply says, "If there's a Don here, he doesn't leave footprints." But not everyone is content with Mariano's style. One of his lieutenants, a man named Paolo, begins to grumble. He wants expansion, faster money. He believes they can push toward Palermo, maybe challenge the other Dons. "Why wait?" he asks one day. Mariano looks at him calmly. "Because storms come without invitation. You don't need to run toward them." Paolo doesn't get it, so he acts on his own. A shipment is sent into Palermo territory without permission. Small, but loud. It sparks tension. Riina hears. Questions fly. Mariano reacts fast. Not with guns, but with sacrifice. He calls a meeting, attends in person, no guards, no lawyers. He faces Riina and says, "I didn't authorize the move. I corrected it. What correction? Rena sneers. Mariano nods once. Paolo is never seen again. Rena, curious, chuckles. You don't like blood, but you spill it when you must. I like order, Mariano replies. And salt? The two men regard each other. It's not respect. Not yet. But it's recognition. From that day forward, Rena no longer questions Mariano's discipline. He sees that beneath the calm is something colder than rage. Precision. And perhaps that's more dangerous. The sea winds pick up again as autumn settles across Marsala. The salt pans glisten under gray skies, their shallow pools like mirrors cracked by time. Mariano stands on the path between them, coat buttoned, collar raised. He's 40 now. The town's changed, faces come and go, but he remains anchored. By this point, the whispers have turned into patterns. If a judge transfers to Palermo, someone notes who helped arrange housing. If a customs officer gets promoted, there's a quiet nod in Mariano's direction. These aren't favors. They're investments. And Mariano never forgets where his investments lie. He's no longer a local operator. His name is listed, quietly, obliquely, among the cupola. Not in the front row, not a screamer like Rena or Brusca, but a seated man, a listener. When the larger syndicates meet, Mariano says little, but when he does speak, rooms go quiet. The invitation had come without fanfare, a letter delivered by hand. No return address. Just a date, a time, and a place. A villa in Corleone, with thick walls and thicker history. He arrives early. The men assembled are not like the dockside smugglers of his youth. These are landowners, judges' nephews, ex-army men with medals no longer pinned to uniforms. They drink espresso in silence, their words measured like gunpowder. At the center of it all sits Rena, thick hands, sharp eyes, laughter like a door slammed shut. He addresses Mariano first. We've watched you. I assumed, Mariano replies. Rena chuckles. You don't want to rule Palermo? I don't want to be ruled by it. There's a pause, and someone, perhaps Provenzano, grunts approval. And just like that, Mariano has a seat. This changes things. It means access. It means risk. More than ever, he must balance. Maintain Marsala. Obey just enough to avoid suspicion. Push back just enough to maintain his sovereignty. He does it well. For a while. He begins using Marsala's tiny airports. Not for passengers, for cargo. Light planes fly in at dusk, often under the guise of agricultural transport. They leave heavier than they came. Inside, cash, sometimes documents, occasionally people. The Moroccan connection flourishes. Mariano doesn't just ship hashish now, he coordinates. Routes from Casablanca pass through Tangier, then by boat to Sicily, then up through Calabria and into Rome. From Rome, couriers drive into Austria and Germany. No one gets caught. The packages are sealed tight, marked as saffron or dried fruit. Of course, this level of activity can't stay secret forever. Interpol begins to take notice. They don't name him, not yet. But operations within Marsala are flagged. Names get traced. An agent stationed in Palermo begins to follow the network. He finds patterns, hints, a name, Agate. He digs deeper. One night, Mariano receives a call, not from a lieutenant, but from a priest. There's a man asking about your godson, the priest whispers. Says he's an uncle. Mariano thanks him. No further instruction is needed. By morning, the agent is recalled. Not harmed, not threatened. But someone whispers into someone else's ear, and the agent's mother receives a promotion. The agent himself is sent to Lisbon. That's how Mariano operates. Not through bullets, but through precision disruptions of ambition. But it's not always so smooth. Around this time, his younger brother, Luciano, starts making mistakes. He's eager, hot-tempered, and unlike Mariano, he wants credit, wants respect handed to him like wine. Mariano keeps him close, gives him legitimate work, vineyards, shipping manifests, a small warehouse in Marsala. But Luciano wants more. He begins reaching out to contacts in Palermo. Without permission, without subtlety, Mariano notices. He invites his brother for lunch. Grilled swordfish, olives, bread. "You're not me," he says. Luciano bristles. "I'm not trying to be you." "No." Mariano nods. "You're trying to be something noisier. That always ends badly." Luciano scoffs. "I want more." "Then you should learn to want less," Mariano says. For a while the warning works. Luciano steps back. But damage has already been done. A name slipped to the wrong man. A route compromised. A car stopped just north of Salerno. 3 arrests. One of them flips. Rome starts watching again. This time, Mariano doesn't call the priest. He calls the Moroccan. A meeting is arranged. Neutral ground, near Valencia. A quiet room. 4 men. No phones. The Moroccan is worried. Too many arrests. Too many questions. Mariano listens, then says, "We pause everything." The Moroccan nods. Within days, shipments stop. Boats dock empty, trucks turn around. Everyone loses money, but no one goes to jail. That's how Mariano keeps power. Not by pushing forward, but by pulling back before the tide breaks. And yet, there's unrest within the cupola. Raina is growing bolder. Bombs, public killings, judges slain in broad daylight. The state begins to retaliate with fury. Maxi trials, indictments, arrests in waves. Mariano keeps his distance. He doesn't attend every meeting now, sends representatives, keeps Marsala quiet. He invests more into legal fronts, fisheries, restaurants, small vineyards. He starts writing more checks than favors. His accountant becomes his new consigliere, but pressure is mounting. In 1991, an article appears in a German paper. It names a Marsala-based operator suspected of coordinating narcotics between Sicily and Tunisia. No name, but the description fits. Mariano reads it once, folds the paper, and burns it. He doesn't speak for hours. That night, he walks the docks again, like when he was young. The sea is calm. Boats rock gently. Somewhere, a gull cries. He thinks not about retreat, but about silence, about disappearing entirely. For the first time, the tide doesn't comfort him. It warns. Mariano Agate steps further into shadow, just as the rest of Sicily begins to burn. The early 90s are not kind to men who made quiet fortunes in the margins. Rina, never one for subtlety, has drawn the eyes of the world to Cosa Nostra's door. Through blood, through bombs, through bodies. And in Marsala, Mariano listens to every echo of those explosions from behind thick shutters. He adjusts, as he always has. But this time, adjustment doesn't mean expansion. It means insulation. He rewrites the books. He untangles the supply chains. He burns names, shuffles positions, buries routes beneath new fronts. One week, he's exporting citrus oil. The next, it's seafood logistics. The product changes. The core stays the same. Movement, control, silence. The cupola, if it can still be called that, fractures. Some men go to prison, others go underground, and a few vanish entirely, either by steel or sea. Mariano doesn't run. He simply recedes. Like the tide at night, his lawyers, always kept at arm's length until now, become closer. His accountant begins sleeping with a pistol near his ledger. Mariano tells him gently, "If you need that gun, you've already lost." The accountant chuckles. "Then I'll aim for the ledgers first." Still, things aren't collapsing. They're hardening. Mariano's empire becomes less an organism, More a shell, resilient, but less alive, less human. He walks less often, travels in curtained cars, spends hours staring from his villa's high windows toward the horizon, like the sea might whisper a new plan. But the ocean says nothing. Then comes a summons, not from Raina. Raina has other problems. He's being hunted. No, this summons comes from Rome. A subtle signal. Investigators are reopening the Marsala files. Old cases, new interest. Mariano responds the only way he can, by eliminating questions. He transfers property to nieces. He dissolves companies. He shifts money into art, into wine collections, into accounts that don't trace back to anyone who breathes above ground. One night he attends a baptism. His goddaughter, daughter of a judge's second cousin. He's calm, well-dressed, silver creeping into his beard now. The priest shakes his hand. A senator kisses his cheek. Children run past, never guessing the man watching them once oversaw a shipment of 12 tons of hashish through 3 countries. But that's always been his gift, remaining unremarkable in remarkable places. It's at that same baptism he hears whispers. A contact from Naples leans in during the reception and murmurs. They're watching the Moroccan. That night, Mariano dreams of nets, torn ones, and fish that slip away. So he acts. He sends word, across water, through lines no longer safe, to cut all ties. The Moroccan, smart as ever, vanishes without a farewell. The route closes, and with it, a chapter. In its place, Mariano leans into legitimate ventures. Or rather, ventures so tangled in law and paper that even prosecutors can't trace their origins. One such venture, the Marsala port renovation project, a public-private partnership, investment from northern firms. A contract bid won by a company Mariano doesn't officially own. But when construction begins, the workers are his. The concrete suppliers are his. Even the men painting the cranes wear boots paid for by someone named Agate. A regional journalist tries to dig. She publishes an article titled, "The Don Who Disappeared into Paperwork." It gets little traction. The paper folds within the year. Still, not all is calm. Luciano, his brother, resurfaces. Not physically. He knows better. But in rumors. A deal in Calabria gone bad. A name dropped. An arrest made. Mariano's name surfaces in the deposition. He doesn't react at first, but later that week, a courier delivers a package to a fishmonger in Messina. Inside, a photo of Luciano on a ferry, and a handwritten note. "He's your blood. That's why he's still breathing." Mariano sits with that for a long time. Later, he tells his driver, "Book me passage south. No security. Just you." In Calabria, he meets an old friend, a man named Tonino, once a gunman, now a vineyard owner, with knuckles still like gravel. They drink wine under the canopy, and Mariano asks, "Is blood enough?" Tonino, who has lost 2 sons to the life, shrugs. "It's enough to bury, not enough to follow." Mariano returns to Marsala with no further action taken. Luciano is never heard from again. Whether by flight or force, no one knows. Mariano says nothing, but his eyes are heavier now. The silences he once wielded as tools begin to feel like burdens. The networks he spent decades building are tightening around him, not from betrayal, but from time. The newer generation doesn't understand patience. They want fast money, louder names, sharper toys. They don't understand the old ways. The handshake that means everything. The look that means more than a contract. Mariano sees the shift and doesn't try to stop it. He simply adapts. Again, he starts writing. Not memoirs. Nothing that could be published. Just notes. Letters to himself. Observations. A line about the way salt clings longer on colder days. A paragraph about how trust feels different now, brittle like old rope. He hides the pages in old wine bottles, corked and buried beneath olive trees. No one finds them, at least not yet, and so he waits. For the next storm, for the next silence, for the tide to turn again. The wind in Marsala grows colder. It whistles through the alleyways with a kind of memory. The sea no longer murmurs with opportunity. It groans with weight. And Mariano Agate, the man who once charted empires across waves and whispers, begins to vanish into the very quiet he used to command. It's Day 3 now. Rena has been captured. The air across Sicily is different, thin with paranoia, thick with tension. Palermo, once the center of control, is under siege. Magistrates no longer whisper, they roar. The streets carry the echo of trials, not deals. And the old codes, the unwritten rules Mariano lived by, are breaking down under floodlights and microphones. But Marsala? Marsala still bows to tide and salt and silence. Mariano becomes even more invisible. His name surfaces only in codes, initials and ledgers. His face appears less in public. When he does walk through town, it's early morning, before the cafes open, before school children fill the cobblestones with noise. His neighbors call him L'uomo del mare, the man of the sea. Not out of respect or fear, but because no one truly knows where he begins or ends. He's part of the landscape now, like the dunes, like the fog that settles each dawn and disappears by breakfast. One morning, he visits his old elementary school, not for nostalgia, for repair. The roof is leaking. He pays the full amount, cash in a sealed envelope, to the headmaster. Says nothing, accepts no thanks. The only condition, the books in the library must be updated, particularly the ones about geography. He tells the headmaster, children should know where things come from, where they go. That's how they survive. The headmaster nods, not quite understanding. Back home, Mariano keeps to routine. Coffee, walks, letters without names. His staff is reduced now. Just a housekeeper, a driver, and one man named Pietro, who never speaks unless spoken to. Pietro once took a bullet meant for someone else. Mariano gave him a house and a lifetime of quiet in return. Still, the world creeps in. The maxi trials are still rippling. Testimonies unfold like long-lost maps. Names long buried are exhumed in courtrooms filled with microphones and cameras. Prosecutors comb through every region. One day a letter arrives, not a threat, not a warrant, just a polite request to appear as a witness in a regional investigation into narcotics. The name on the letter isn't his, but the address is. Mariano reads it, folds it, places it in the fire. Then he prepares. He visits the vineyard, checks the barrels. Some still hold wine, others, nothing. Just darkness, and the kind of silence that makes you wonder if something is hiding in it. He sends Pietro to speak with an old friend in Caltanissetta, a lawyer, not flashy, but precise. Within a week, the request disappears, but Mariano knows it's temporary, so he closes doors. He sells 2 warehouses, transfers ownership of his Marsala estate to a cousin's daughter who's never met him. He withdraws from operations, leaving only the most trusted lieutenants in place. Even they don't know where the last meetings took place, or how the next will happen. Then comes the sea. It always returns. The Moroccan writes from Algiers, a new proposal. A route not by ship, but by land, through Tunisia and into Sicily by disguised aid convoys. Low profile, high reward, but risky. The Moroccan wants Mariano back in full. Mariano doesn't say no, but he doesn't say yes. Instead he asks, what do you miss most? The Moroccan writes back, the quiet of the salt flats. No more letters follow. Back in Marsala, a new face emerges. a young prosecutor with ambition and clean shoes. He starts asking about the docks, the warehouse, the vineyard contracts. At first, he gets nothing, but then someone, perhaps a minor customs officer, mentions the name Agate. The prosecutor pulls the thread, and Mariano feels it, like a tremor beneath the soles of his feet. He attends Mass more frequently now, not out of fear, but out of ritual. He lights candles for men who've disappeared. He nods at the priest, but never stays for the full sermon. His faith, like his power, is not performative. It's practical. One afternoon, he sits in a church pew, alone. A woman sits behind him, middle-aged, wears black, speaks softly. "My husband. He used to work at your docks before they changed hands." "I remember," Mariano replies. "He died owing money." Mariano turns, looks at her. "Not anymore," he says. She leaves, says nothing more. The next day, a payment arrives at her address. Anonymous. But these gestures, these remnants of the old codes, are starting to feel like fossils. The newer men in the game don't send envelopes. They send photos, videos. They don't believe in favors, only leverage. And Mariano, so rooted in the invisible, knows he has no use for visibility in a world where everything is surveillance. He stops using phones altogether. One night, as he walks past the salt pans, he notices the sea is higher than usual. It crashes harder against the rocks, like it's trying to speak. But Mariano no longer listens for opportunity, only for warning. And the sea, in its ancient language, tells him, it's time to disappear more deeply than ever before. So he does. Not with a bang, not with a police raid. With a whisper, he withdraws, leaves behind the vineyard, the warehouses, even the villa. Where he goes, no one knows. The papers call it a fugitive escape. Interpol lists him as missing. Rome calls for an investigation. But in Marsala, people simply stop talking about him. And the sea? The sea remembers. The salt wind still rolls in each morning, curling around the barrels and boats of Marsala, like a habit that can't be broken. But the man they once called Don Mariano is no longer there to walk its edge. To the outside world, he's vanished. Interpol lists him officially as a fugitive by early 1994. No fingerprints on any recent arrests, no photos, no footage, just theories. Some suggesting he fled to Brazil, others whispering of Morocco, of Libya, of desert villas where the sea never reaches. But to the people of Marsala, Mariano Agate becomes less of a criminal and more of a folk memory. He's not spoken of at dinner tables, not directly, but his absence feels like a drawn breath, held just a second too long. The Marsala docks operate as usual. Fishermen haul their nets. The Port Authority stamps invoices. But the rhythm has changed. There's less certainty in every handshake, less silence in every deal. The tide doesn't know who to obey anymore. Back in Palermo, the crackdown continues. Riina is behind bars. Provenzano hides deeper with each sunrise. The cupola is now more rumor than institution. And yet, somewhere far from this chaos, Mariano watches it all, quietly, methodically. He lives like a ghost, but breathes like a man with a plan. In a crumbling farmhouse south of Marsala, nestled behind overgrown olive trees, and a gate with no lock, a figure matching his build is occasionally seen tending vines at dusk. He doesn't speak. The few neighbors within walking distance know only that a cousin from up north now lives there, quiet, alone, and always with a scarf over his face. Inside that farmhouse, there is no television, only a shortwave radio, a cracked chessboard, and a drawer full of notepads, each filled with diagrams of routes, currencies, and boat measurements. The operations may be paused, But Mariano's mind is still charting waves. He doesn't stay there long. He rotates between places. A shepherd's hut in Calabria, a villa once owned by a Spanish widow outside Ragusa, a series of hidden rooms built under abandoned wineries. All of them quiet, all of them temporary. He trusts no wall, no window. His shadow lingers, but his footprints vanish with the morning dew. And yet, even in retreat, he remains a Don. Lieutenants still pass messages, quietly. A box of fish left on a doorstep means one thing, a shipment of lemons another. The old codes are alive, but only among a dying breed. One such message reaches him in the spring of 1995. A courier leaves a crate of anchovies outside a chapel in Trapani. Inside is a photograph, one of his former associates, beaten. Alive, but barely. The photograph is signed with a name Mariano hasn't heard in years. Cosimo. A man once passed over for promotion. Impatient, blunt, dangerous only because he doesn't know how to wait. Mariano sighs. He knows he must act. Not with knives, not with bullets, but with tide. So he sends a response, not to Cosimo, but to those who might consider aligning with him. A single bottle of Marsala wine, vintage 1979. No note, just a red ribbon around the neck. The message is clear. I'm still watching. And I remember everything. A week later, Cosimo's name stops appearing in conversations. He's not dead, just irrelevant. This is how Mariano continues to rule, not with presence, but with the weight of having once been everywhere. By 1996, the rumors change. Some say he's dying. Others believe he lives abroad, running a small marina under a different name. One woman insists she saw him in Tunisia, speaking Arabic and eating alone. A priest claims he confessed his sins through a closed screen, but gave no name. But back in Sicily, the man himself keeps moving. Always alone, he begins writing again. Not logistics, not strategy, but memory. One notebook contains only short phrases. The sea is patient. Power is the shadow of trust. Do not teach men fear, teach them absence. Another page contains a single line repeated over and over. I was never here. And still, his network, what remains of it, functions like tidewater in a dying port. Crates still move. Boats still dock. Taxes still vanish into the folds of paperwork. But everyone knows it's fading. One young enforcer asks his mentor, "Why don't we just take over? He's not even here." The older man answers without looking up, "Because he might be watching, and because you're not ready." In the background of all this, the authorities begin to close the circle. In late 97, a regional prosecutor receives a new tip, an anonymous letter claiming Mariano is living under a false identity, tending sheep in a mountain village. The letter is vague, no signature, but it reignites interest. Interpol restarts its search with renewed vigor. Mariano hears of this, not through newspapers, but through the silence of certain informants. Men who once spoke freely suddenly go quiet. This tells him more than any headline. He abandons the shepherd's hut, moves further inland. For months, he doesn't see the sea. And this is what breaks him. Not the law, not fear, the sea, the absence of it. He begins dreaming of Marsala, the salt on his hands, the gulls, the sun on wet docks. In one dream, he walks the shore barefoot, and each wave whispers a name he failed to protect. He wakes with tears he doesn't remember shedding, so he returns, not to the town, but to its scent. A small vineyard west of Trapani, abandoned, overgrown. He buys it under a false name, builds a shack, and each evening walks to the edge of the land where the sea is just visible through the trees. Not close enough to touch, but enough to smell, to know it's there. And that somehow is enough. Time has slowed in the West. By 1998, the world has forgotten how to speak Mariano Agate's name aloud. but the old stones of Marsala remember. Every alley where business was once transacted with a nod, every pier where crates changed hands beneath the rustle of wind-blown tarps. These places still carry his outline, like chalk long since washed away but not quite erased. At the vineyard-turned-refuge outside Trapani, Mariano wakes early. He drinks bitter coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. He listens to the crows in the distance, reads the sea's silence like scripture. He writes again, this time not in code or caution, but in reflection. The notebooks grow thicker. Inside them, he doesn't confess crimes. He catalogs behavior, lessons, warnings. A page labeled Rain is followed by observations about betrayal. Another, titled Salt, muses on what loyalty tastes like when tested. And still, messages reach him. Not many, just enough. A small crate arrives in April. 3 Sicilian lemons, each wrapped in wax paper. No note. But the weight is clear. It means your vineyard is known, but still respected. The man who delivers it is found to be a former clerk at the Port Authority, now working for a cousin of a cousin. Mariano doesn't react. He simply returns a bottle of wine, sealed. No label, just a cork with a strand of red thread tied around it. This exchange will later become the subject of a whispered lecture among up-and-coming men in Naples. They'll say, that's how he stayed alive, not through power, but through precision. And in a way, they're right. The vineyard becomes his monastery. He no longer runs operations. He lets them drift. If someone picks up the pieces, they do so under no illusion that they are Mariano. They're simply borrowing silence. Occasionally, younger men try to visit. One succeeds. He's in his early 30s, sharp suit, clever eyes, but too quick to speak. He introduces himself as Vincenzo, the son of a man Mariano once spared. I want to bring things back, the young man says. Mariano raises an eyebrow. Back to what? To the order, to the silence, to your way. Mariano pours him wine, waits, then speaks slowly. My way only worked because no one called it mine. Vincenzo smiles like he understands, but he doesn't. Before the sun sets, Mariano sees him off. Later that month, Vincenzo is arrested in Rome, caught laundering money through shell firms in Spain. His mugshot hits the papers. His smile is gone. Mariano sees the article, folds it, doesn't read it again. He's nearing 70 now. His health has begun to fray, not violently, but gently, like a suit worn too many times in the rain. His joints ache. His breathing wheezes in the mornings. The cold bites deeper, but he doesn't complain. He wraps his scarf tighter. He shortens his walks. He eats little. What matters more now are the hours of light. He sits on the porch and watches clouds move across the Sicilian sky. He counts ships far in the distance, barely visible on the waterline. He listens to the earth, and sometimes at night he talks to it, not like a madman, like a man who remembers everything has a voice, even things no longer living. One night he hears footsteps, not from the vineyard path, from the side, the olive grove. He doesn't move, just waits. A young woman steps out of the shadows, hair tied back, jacket too big, eyes sharp. I'm from Palermo, she says. He nods. I'm writing a book. No, he replies. She pauses. I haven't asked anything yet. You don't need to. The answer is no. But don't you want to be remembered? He exhales. Memory is like ash, soft, drifts, doesn't anchor. She doesn't argue. But before she leaves, she asks, why salt? You wrote about it, talked about it, even traded in it. Why did it matter? Mariano looks at her for a long time, because it preserves even the dead. She nods and walks away. He doesn't see her again. That year, one of his last remaining allies, a judge's brother-in-law, dies suddenly. No warning. Heart failure. At the funeral, Mariano doesn't appear, but a single black rose is left on the casket. No card. They know who it's from. By the winter of '99, Mariano's world has shrunk to 3 places: the porch, the writing desk, and the edge of the vineyard where the sea can just be seen. He hasn't spoken to family in years. What few still live do so in other towns, other lives. He left them clean, untouched. That was the gift. He knows he's hunted. He knows Rome still wants him in chains, but he also knows something they don't. He has already vanished. He is no longer a Don, no longer a player. He is the space where those things once stood. And in that silence, there is power. That winter, a storm hits the coast hard, stronger than usual. Trees uprooted, boats dashed against rocks. The vineyard suffers damage. The roof over the writing room collapses. Rain warps pages, ruins ink. But Mariano is untouched. He sleeps through the worst of it in the wine cellar below ground, where everything feels like waiting. When he emerges, the sun is out. The salt flats in the distance shimmer like mirrors. He sits down beside the broken desk, finds a page that survived, and writes a single line. Let them search the waves, I am already tied. The dawn of a new millennium means little to Mariano Agate. The world outside buzzes with fear of computer crashes and celebration over digital promises. But in the hills outside Marsala, a man in his 70s tends vines with hands that once balanced entire empires in their calluses. He's still off the grid. No official sightings, no confirmed location, no arrest. But his presence hums faintly through the undercurrents of Sicily's darker conversations. Occasionally, in the cafes of Palermo, an older man will lean close to another and say, "You know he's not gone." Just listening. The vineyard continues to function. Barely. Mariano sells enough to maintain appearances. Bottles are labeled with false names, sold through tiny distribution chains. A wine bar in Bologna carries his vintage, unknowingly. A crate marked Toscano Table Red ends up at a politician's retirement dinner. He'd laugh if he cared to keep track, but he doesn't. Now, his focus is narrower. His world consists of the earth beneath him, the sea beside him, and the ghosts he welcomes without invitation. One of those ghosts comes walking in real flesh one morning. A courier, early 30s, tired eyes, respectful posture. He doesn't speak right away, just places a manila envelope on the table. Mariano nods toward it. Open it. Inside, photographs, grainy, surveillance style. One of them shows Mariano leaning on a cane near the gate of the vineyard. Another shows a man he once trusted in Trapani, now working with prosecutors. And another shows his accountant, the one who used to joke about guns, entering a courthouse. Mariano stares at the pictures for a long time. Finally, he speaks. Do they know? The courier shakes his head. Not yet, but they're getting close. Mariano exhales. He thanks the courier, then burns the photos in the fireplace and watches the smoke carry versions of himself into the rafters. The next day, he does something he hasn't done in years. He calls someone from a borrowed phone in a tiny bakery in Castelvetrano. The line is clean, the conversation short. A name, a location, a set of instructions. The gears begin to turn again, slow but precise. He doesn't run. That would break the pattern. And besides, he has nowhere left to run. The vineyard is no longer a hiding place. It's a tomb in waiting. Instead, he prepares. He moves the notebooks. Not the ones about trade routes or shipments. Those were long since destroyed. These are the others. The ones about salt, loyalty, and time. He places them in a crate and buries it beneath the oldest olive tree, one planted by his grandfather. The roots already guard secrets. One more won't trouble them. He prepares the house, not like someone escaping, like someone hosting. The place is cleaned, dishes stacked neatly, fireplace lit, a kettle placed on the stove. If they come, he wants them to see peace, not defiance, not fear, just peace. And they do come. April 19th, 2000. 3 plainclothes officers. No guns drawn. No shouting. They find him sitting at the window, staring toward the coast. One of them, barely older than Mariano's earliest lieutenants, clears his throat. "Mr. Agate?" Mariano turns. "Yes, you're under arrest for association with mafia activities, international drug trafficking, and criminal conspiracy." Mariano stands slowly. "Thank you for not breaking the door." They nod. He doesn't resist, doesn't speak further, just walks down the dirt path, into the car, toward the next chapter. News spreads quickly. Don Mariano Agate arrested after decade on the run. The headlines are loud, but the article is short on facts. No weapons found. No cash seized. No new charges beyond those long suspected. The prosecutor calls him a ghost in a suit. A man who let silence do the killing. Back in Marsala, the older fishermen say little. One shrugs. The sea brings things back, always. In prison, Mariano says even less. He's placed in maximum security. A single cell, gray walls, fluorescent lights. The guards call him Nano, Grandpa. He walks the yard each morning like a priest pacing a chapel aisle. He writes again, this time with pencil on legal pads. Notebooks are forbidden. He writes of the sea, of nets, of gulls, of what it means to be needed, then forgotten. One day he receives a letter, no return address. Inside, a photo of the vineyard. It's empty now, overgrown, and a note. We kept it quiet, just like you taught us. He folds it, places it beneath his pillow. Later he's called to testify, not in court, in a small, sterile room with 2 men in suits who pretend not to know who he is. He refuses to speak. They ask again. He stares at the window and says, "I already told my story." "When?" "When I disappeared." The room goes silent. They leave. His trial begins the following year. The charges are old, the evidence older. No smoking guns, just ghosts. The prosecution tries to paint him as the architect of an empire. A spider with threads stretching from Casablanca to Calabria. But witnesses are vague, documents thin, dates unclear. He's convicted, of course, but the sentence is light compared to what they hoped. House arrest due to age, confinement to a monitored location. They offer him the option, prison or confinement. He chooses prison. "I've already lived alone," he says. Might as well do it where the walls admit it. And in that, he earns a rare thing, reluctant respect, even from his jailers. They give him space, a chair near the window, a plant someone smuggled in, and every few weeks, a letter, no names, just reminders that the sea hasn't forgotten him. From the moment the heavy doors close behind him, the prison becomes just another landscape for Mariano Agate, one with its own tides, its own codes, its own quiet. The concrete doesn't intimidate him. The routine doesn't agitate him. In fact, in a way no one expects, he settles in. He rises early, always before the guard's shift change, brushes his teeth with the same meticulous care he once used to arrange shipping schedules, folds his blanket, sits by the barred window, and waits for the sun to bleed over the wall. To the other inmates, he is a curiosity. Not for his crimes, they've all done worse, but for his presence. He is serene, measured. When he speaks, which is rare, he uses the kind of quiet voice that forces others to lean in. He is never loud, never hurried. One inmate, a younger man from Catania with too many tattoos and not enough wisdom, tries to impress him. Brags about deals gone wrong, people disappeared, cars torched. Mariano listens for a moment, then smiles gently. "You ever bury a mistake in salt, then wait 10 years to see if it rots anyway?" The man doesn't answer. He doesn't understand. Few do. The guards call him Il Professore, the professor. Not for his education, but for the way he seems to be watching an invisible class, grading their conduct. He speaks only when necessary, reads everything they allow, keeps notes in margins, observes the movement of men the way he once watched fishing boats drift toward the Trapani docks, calculating where they'll land and when. And occasionally he writes, not letters, not requests, but lines, single lines, each on a page of a worn notepad. Regret is a tide that never breaks. Power is the space between questions. Memory, like salt, preserves only what it chooses. The guards don't know what to do with him. He's not dangerous. He's not manipulative. He doesn't scheme. He just is. But they feel it, the gravity he carries. When he walks through the courtyard, arguments fade. Cards are set down. Men straighten. Not from fear, from a strange, inherited respect. Even the warden notices. He's more stable than the walls, the man mutters during a staff meeting. If he ever escapes, I think the building would fall down. Mariano laughs when told this days later. I escaped already, he replies. They just took a little while to catch up. Visitors are rare. Most of his family has long since cut ties. Not from anger. Mariano made sure of that. But from distance. He built the walls. They only obeyed them. Still, one afternoon, a nun visits. No one knows who she is. She leaves no name. She sits across from him in the visitation room. Her habit is worn. Her hands tremble. You paid for the orphanage roof, she says, eyes not meeting his. You would have done the same, he answers. I'm not sure I would have. Then you understand me better than most. She leaves without asking for anything. He never sees her again. Weeks pass, then months. Seasons turn, and yet the rhythms remain. A new inmate arrives in the spring of 2002. Loud, arrogant, connected to newer factions, the kind that don't remember the old codes. He tries to buy power, bribes a guard, throws around favors. He approaches Mariano one day in the yard, sits too close, starts a story about a judge's daughter, a nightclub, and blackmail. Mariano waits until he finishes, then says, you mistake noise for memory. What? If they forget you tomorrow, you never mattered. The man scoffs, laughs, walks away. 2 weeks later, he's caught in a scandal, moved to another wing. No one mourns his absence. Mariano's words spread, as they tend to do. One guard begins writing them down, starts a little notebook titled Agatisms. Most are one-liners. Others are harder to decipher, like riddles in salt. Silence does not forget. It just files things differently. You don't dig graves, you grow them. One line simply reads, I never raised my voice, and yet here I am. That line makes its way somehow to the desk of a regional prosecutor. She reads it twice, wonders whether it's arrogance, irony, or some blend of both. She tries to arrange another interview. Mariano refuses. He's done explaining. There is no trial left, no argument to be made, no sentence to negotiate. He lives inside the consequence of choices long past. But something inside him is changing. It's not guilt. He's never worn that like others do. It's something quieter, like an old bell underwater, still ringing, but without sound. In his small cell, he started drawing maps, not of cities, of time, little graphs that plot loyalty, patience, regret. He marks names, some with lines that continue, some with lines that fade. One name, circled in black ink, Luciano. Beside it, a question mark. After all these years, he still doesn't know where his brother went, or if he's alive, or if he'd want to be found. Some nights, he imagines the two of them walking the salt flats again, barefoot, saying nothing. Other nights, he imagines a bullet in the dark. Both feel like truth. In August of that year, a tremor shakes the prison, literally. An earthquake, minor, no real damage. But afterward, Mariano speaks more. Nothing dramatic, just stories, short ones, about boats, about the sea, About a man in Morocco who once tried to sell him oranges packed with diamonds. The men listen, even the guards. One inmate says, "I heard you built an empire." Mariano shakes his head. "I just held the map. Others filled it in." Then he smiles. A good map always leaves space for the unknown. The days in prison have begun to blend, as they do for all men in cells. But for Mariano Agate, each hour is still a measured step, a note held too long, a silence that says more than speech ever could. His eyes have dimmed, but they still scan. His hands tremble slightly now, but they remain steady enough to underline a sentence or fold a page corner precisely. By 2003, the outside world barely remembers his name. There are newer arrests, louder trials, headlines full of younger, flashier figures. Crime has changed. It wears suits with pocket squares now, quotes economists, sponsors football clubs. But none of that reaches the stone corridors where Mariano lives. He still walks, always at dawn, 3 loops of the yard, always counterclockwise. The guards once asked why. "Because most men spend their lives going the wrong way," he said. "I might as well practice turning back." He's made something like friends here, if men like him are capable of such things. There's Carmine, a former judge who fell on the wrong side of a political feud. He plays chess with Mariano every Thursday, and always loses. There's Marco, a lifer from Naples who barely speaks but always offers Mariano the last cigarette when the rations come in. And then there's young Salvo, barely 20, picked up on a trafficking charge. No family, no crew, no future. A mouth too quick and a heart too raw. He gravitates to Mariano like a stray cat to an open window. At first, Mariano says little to him. Then one afternoon, during a thunderstorm, Salvo approaches him in the chapel. "They say you ran everything," the boy mutters. "All of it. The ports, the money, the judges." Mariano doesn't answer. Salvo frowns. "I mean, how did you know who to trust?" Mariano finally turns to him. "You don't." Pause. "You only know who deserves to be trusted once you no longer need them." Salvo stares. It's not the answer he expected, but it sticks. From then on, the boy sits near him in the yard, asks questions, quiet ones, not just about crime, but about survival. And Mariano answers, when he feels like it. He tells Salvo about a smuggler in Libya who navigated by scent, about a priest in Marsala who once stored contraband behind holy water, about the time a shipment was saved by a single, unscheduled rainstorm. Each story is a lesson, but never labeled as such, and the boy learns. One morning, Salvo is gone, transferred, no explanation, just absence. Mariano sits a little longer in the yard that day, doesn't speak, just watches the sky. Later, a guard slips a folded napkin under his tray. On it, "Thank you for the tide." No signature. Mariano folds it again and tucks it into his worn pocket notebook. That same week, his health begins to fail. He's still sharp, but slower. Bones ache, breathing shallow. He refuses medication unless it's necessary, refuses a wheelchair, refuses sympathy, but he accepts one thing, a plant, a small rosemary bush in a ceramic pot. Carmine, the chess player, smuggled it in, claiming it was for the air. Mariano waters it each day, sometimes talks to it, never with words about regret, just about weather and wind. The guards allow it, even respect it. There's a moment, late one evening, when a guard, new, young, unsure, sits near Mariano during his last lap around the yard. "Can I ask something?" Mariano nods. "Do you ever wish you'd lived differently?" He stops walking, looks at the sky, then says, "No." Pause. "But I do wish the world had." The guard nods like he understands, but he doesn't. Not yet. Later that year, Rome sends word. Mariano will be moved. Health review. Security adjustment. Something vague and bureaucratic. He's transferred at dawn, in a van with no markings, flanked by 2 officers who barely speak. The new facility is smaller, older, less strict somehow. more hospice than fortress. He's placed in a private room. Has a view of trees now, not walls. A nurse offers him tea. He declines, but he does ask for paper. They give him some, and for the first time in years, he writes not in riddles or fragments, but full thoughts. The first line on the first page: "If you build quietly enough, no one hears it fall." He writes about salt, about patience, about wind. He writes about Luciano, not with anger, not with grief, just with wonder. Where did he go? Does he remember the smell of the docks? Did he ever forgive Mariano for choosing silence over blood? These pages are never shared, but a few of them will be found years later, in a drawer beneath the bed, folded inside a hollowed-out book about Mediterranean fish species. One page ends with a strange phrase: "They came to arrest me, but I'd already left." The nurse who finds it doesn't understand. She thinks it's poetry, and maybe it is. In this new place, Mariano fades further. Some days, he doesn't rise until noon. Other days, he watches the sun rise with unblinking eyes. No one knows what he's thinking. No one dares ask. Once he dreams of Marsala. He's barefoot, 10 years old again. The docks stretch ahead of him, infinite and golden in the light. His mother calls his name. He turns to answer, but the wind takes the sound away, and when he wakes, he doesn't speak for 3 days. The calendar on the wall says 2004, but Mariano Agate doesn't track years anymore. He measures time in smaller increments now, the way light slants across the floor in the early morning, the number of steps it takes him to reach the rosemary plant on the windowsill, the rhythm of breath when no one else is listening. His world has narrowed, but it hasn't collapsed. Not yet. In the facility, less a prison than a place where the state warehouses men too old to fight back, he's treated as both relic and riddle. Some staff call him Signor Agate. Others simply say, the old one. No one disrespects him. Even the orderlies, barely in their 20s, lower their voices around his room. The doctors file reports with words like frailty, cardiovascular decline, mental acuity preserved, but none of them know how to chart the weight he still carries. There's no diagnosis for a man who commands silence just by existing in it. And then, one quiet morning, something unexpected happens. He receives a letter, not a legal document, not prison mail, a real letter. Handwritten, smudged slightly on the edges, delivered by a courier who refuses to give a name. The handwriting is familiar. Luciano. He stares at it for a long time before opening it. The note inside is brief. You chose silence. I chose noise. Now we both listen to the same wind. I am alive. I forgive you. That's it. No address, no date, no signature. But Mariano knows it's real, knows it comes not from guilt, but from distance. He reads it once more, then folds it carefully and places it beneath his pillow. That night, he sleeps more deeply than he has in years. The following morning, the nurse finds him already dressed, seated in the corner, waiting for tea. He accepts it, sips slowly, even smiles. Later, he walks, assisted but steady, out to the small courtyard. The rosemary plant is thriving in the sunlight, and he watches the wind move through its leaves like a page being slowly turned. A young inmate from another wing approaches. He's nervous, clearly instructed to help with something mundane, watering plants, sweeping the walkway. But when he sees Mariano, he pauses. You really him? The boy asks. Mariano looks at him. No, he says, then smiles again. I'm just a man who loved the sea too much. The boy nods like that makes sense, like it answers something he hadn't even asked. And then the boy does something no one has done in years. He sits beside him. They don't speak, they just sit. That evening, Mariano returns to his room and pulls out one of the blank notebooks. He writes only one line across the first page. I was never the storm, I was the stillness before it. The staff begin noticing small changes. He's more alert, eats more, requests news clippings, only the local ones, only in Sicilian dialect. Wants to know what's happening back in Marsala, which streets have been paved, whether the port still smells of sardines in the heat. One nurse brings him a photograph taken recently by her cousin, a sunset over the Trapani harbor. He holds it for an hour, doesn't speak, doesn't blink much either, then hands it back and says, "Frame it for the hallway. It deserves to be seen." For the first time since his arrest, the state considers granting him relocation, a monitored residence. Conditional, of course, health-based, compassionate release. The judge reviewing the case writes, "He is no longer a threat to society, if he ever truly was one in the traditional sense." But bureaucracy moves slower than memory, so Mariano continues to wait, continues to write. In one notebook, he begins what could almost be called a memoir, but not in the traditional sense. No names, no places, just reflections. Some of the entries include, "Power doesn't announce itself. It whispers while others shout. No man should lead if he fears losing his echo. Regret is loudest at sunset." And finally, on the last page, "I still dream of boats." The staff doesn't know what to do with his notebooks. They're not evidence. They're not literature. They're just something else, so they let them be. Meanwhile, Mariano begins preparing again, not for escape, not even for death, for return, not physically. He knows Marsala may never be his to walk again, but spiritually, he begins composing what he calls the salt letters, each addressed to no one, each written as though read by the sea. In one, he writes, "To the man who replaces me, do not seek to be known. Seek only to be missed." In another, "To the woman who sells fish at the stall near the fountain, I once paid for your brother's debt. You never knew. You didn't need to." These letters are never sent. He bundles them with twine, places them in a box, and labels it simply, "Tied." One night, a young priest visits the facility. He's new, just ordained. Curious about the old man who never takes confession, never quotes scripture, but carries the weight of a penitent. He sits with Mariano, unsure how to begin. Mariano makes it easy. "You want to know what I regret?" The priest nods. Mariano smiles faintly. "That I never let the waves take me when they had the chance." And then, softer, "But maybe that's what being alive is, choosing shore over surrender." The priest says nothing. Then he reaches out, places his hand on Mariano's shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside the walls, Rome, Palermo, Marsala, ceases to exist. Just the touch, just the stillness, just the breath between questions. The seasons begin shifting again. The light in Mariano's small window tilts at a gentler angle, and the morning wind seems less sharp, more like a sigh than a whisper. It is now late 2004, and though the world outside spins faster, new wars, new scandals, new empires of money and noise, the rhythms inside his walls move like an old waltz no one teaches anymore. His body is weaker. The walks shorten. His tea cools before he finishes, but his eyes, still, do not fade. The doctor calls it functional decline with remarkable lucidity. The nurse calls it old bones and young thoughts. Mariano calls it the tide pulling back to think. Letters come more frequently now, not legal ones, personal, anonymous envelopes with soft handwriting and no return addresses. Someone sends clippings from local Marsala papers, birth announcements, obituaries, even small-town gossip columns. Another sends pages from nautical magazines, maps of sea routes, rare sailboat designs, photos of Sicilian coastlines taken from great distance. In one letter, there's only a single sentence. The stall at the market still sells rosemary by the bundle. He reads that one twice, then carefully folds it and places it under the rosemary pot by his bed. The plant still grows, a little scraggly now, like him, but alive. There's a quiet dignity in decline, Mariano understands that better than most. He was never interested in legacy. Legacy requires noise, statues, memoirs. He prefers consequence. One night, the staff hears music from his room. Not loud. A gramophone playing an old Sicilian folk song. A tune about fishermen who sail by moonlight and speak only to God and ghosts. They find him sitting in his chair, fully dressed, eyes closed, a slight smile on his face. He opens his eyes only when the music ends. "Do you miss it?" one of the nurses asks gently. "The sea?" She nods. Mariano responds, "Every time I breathe in the weeks that follow, the staff begin to record his phrases. Not just the poetic ones, even the strange, fragmented thoughts he mutters before sleep. Some are clear. Trust is a hand you let go of before the storm. Others are more cryptic. The men who carried wine to the hill never drank it. Still others feel like prophecy. You'll know the tide is mine when the silence returns to port. A university professor visits at the request of a cultural research group. He wants to interview Mariano about the oral traditions of the Sicilian coast. How power, myth, and memory were passed in whispers, not ink. Mariano allows it, but only for 10 minutes. He speaks of Marsala's old salt roads, of the way mothers used to sing to their sons in rhythms that matched the pulling of nets, of the shape of wind around the rocks near Punta Alga. When the professor asks about the mafia, Mariano says nothing for a long moment. Then, "It was never the guns. It was the doors we didn't open for fear of who might already be inside." The professor leaves with more questions than answers, exactly as Mariano intended. One morning, a nurse finds a folded page left on the table beside his breakfast. On it, "Let the new kings build what they like. I wrote my rules in the fog." No name, no date, just the ink, slightly smudged by tea. And the days continue. He's granted permission to keep his notebooks now. The administration says it's part of a therapeutic practice. He writes less now, but what he writes carries deeper weight. Like stones dropped in a still pond. Every map I drew began with a question I never asked aloud. Silence is the only true compass. When I was 10, I feared being forgotten. Now I fear being remembered incorrectly. Occasionally he receives drawings from children, crayon depictions of boats, sea creatures. One child draws a lighthouse with a man standing beside it, waving. There's no name on the drawing, just the word nonno. Mariano tapes it to the inside of his locker door. That night, when no one is watching, he weeps, but only for a moment. By now, he's known throughout the facility as something between a philosopher and a saint. New inmates whisper his name with reverence. The staff speaks of him as the one who knew how to vanish without running. They still don't understand him, but they feel him. Late in the year, the state issues a quiet statement. Mariano Agate will not be relocated. His age, his health, and his cooperative behavior have earned him continuation of compassionate detainment. They don't say it outright, but it's clear. This is where he will die. He receives the news without reaction. Later that evening, he writes, "Some men build their tombs out of marble. I built mine out of time. Winter comes, slowly, gently, and with it, fewer visitors, fewer letters. The sea is just a scent now, a shape in memory, but still present." In one of his final entries that December, Mariano writes, "I no longer need to see the waves. I hear them in the silence between questions. And in that silence he waits, not for redemption, not even for peace, just for the tide." The early days of 2005 arrive not with a bang, but with fog, thick, quiet, slow to lift. Outside the facility where Mariano Agate now lives out his final chapter, frost forms on window panes, birds perch in bare olive trees, and even the wind seems to tread softly. Inside, Mariano's world contracts further. He rises later now. The steps from his bed to the chair feel longer. He speaks less, eats less. But when he does speak, it still carries the weight of old ships moving through deep water. The nurses, by now his quiet disciples, grow protective. One brings him fresh rosemary once a week. Another makes sure his tea is served exactly how he prefers. Bitter, dark, no sugar, hot enough to remind him he's alive. And they've learned never to turn off the small radio on his shelf, always tuned to a station that plays classical Sicilian guitar in the early morning. He says nothing when it plays, but on the rare days when it's silent, he notices. "Where's the music?" he once asked gently. The nurse turned it back on immediately. "Don't let the silence pretend it owns the room," he said. In his room, a small shelf holds 5 notebooks now, worn, soft at the edges, each bound with twine. No titles, no dates, just content written in his steady, sloping hand. He still writes. Not every day. But when he does, the lines arrive complete. No edits, no second drafts. Truth doesn't beg to be heard, it waits. If I built anything, it was not an empire. It was an absence where people came to feel powerful. They feared me because they could not hear me. No one dares touch the notebooks. The new director of the facility, a young man with too much ambition and not enough patience, once suggested archiving them for future legal review. Mariano responded with only a look. The notebook stayed untouched. Even now, whispers of his legacy drift through the broader corridors of Sicilian power. His name surfaces in legal circles, always in the past tense. But those who know better don't dare assume, because they remember. Mariano never needed to be seen to be felt. He receives fewer letters now, but one day a package arrives, small, wrapped in brown paper, no name. Inside, a glass bottle filled with seawater and a single piece of parchment, yellowed slightly at the corners. On it, "We took your route. It still works, thank you." No other information. But Mariano smiles for a long time after reading it. He doesn't show the letter to anyone. He just places the bottle on the windowsill, where the morning light filters through it like a memory too strong to fade. And he sits. He sits more than he walks now, watches clouds, traces the grain of the wooden floor with his eyes. Sometimes he closes them and recites old schedules, old drop points, old names. He remembers it all. One afternoon, a priest arrives, not for confession. Mariano still refuses the formalities, but for conversation. They sit together on the small stone bench in the courtyard. The priest says, "You built an empire on silence." Mariano replies, "No, I built a mirror. People only saw what they brought to it." The priest nods, says nothing more, leaves. The night after that, Mariano dreams of his mother. She's younger than he ever remembered her, standing in the old Marsala kitchen, salt crusted on her fingertips, a fish knife glinting beside a pile of lemons. She doesn't speak, just smiles, as if to say, "You can rest now." He wakes slowly, breathing deeply, holding the image until it fades. That morning he doesn't speak, just writes. The final page of a 6th notebook. When they come, they won't find a man, they'll find weather. And what is weather? But memory turned restless? The days pass. The wind sharpens again, but Mariano seems untouched, almost luminous in his stillness. Even the doctors speak in softer tones now, as though trying not to wake something that isn't quite sleeping. Then, one morning, he doesn't rise. He isn't dead, but he's further away, eyes open but unfocused, breath slow but steady, as if already on the shore of something else. They move him to a different room, quieter with fewer distractions. One nurse, the youngest, asks him, "Would you like anything?" He whispers, "The sea." She brings a small radio, finds a station with distant wave sounds and seagulls. He nods. Later that evening, he speaks his last full sentence in days. "Even now I can smell the nets drying." They let him rest. They dim the lights. They lower their voices. And in that hush, the same hush that once cloaked all of Western Sicily, Mariano Agate slips fully into the quiet he always called home. Time does not stop for men, even those who once held it in their palm. By early 2005, as the frost lifts from the northern fields of Sicily and the wind softens with spring, the world continues its quiet forgetting of Mariano Agate. News outlets speak of new names, new trials, new tactics. The digital age accelerates, and in its glare, the shadows once so carefully curated by men like Mariano begin to seem like relics of a quieter mythology. But he is not gone. He is simply older, and more still. The health ward where he now resides, less a prison, more a place to ease into the last chapters of life, has become a silent sanctuary. He remains a mystery to many of the staff, but his presence has taken on something close to reverence. Evenings are spent at the window. The sound of recorded ocean waves trickles from a small speaker. He rarely speaks, rarely needs to. His thoughts are where his empire once stood, Marsala, the coast, the men who came with questions and left with certainty. But in the drifting quiet of these days, another ghost has returned to him. Not a man, not a name, but a presence. The dilemma of Riina. Salvatore Riina, arrested, tried, caged like a storm in a jar, is dying slowly in the north. The man who built his kingdom on violence, on blood, on public spectacle, now fades into irrelevance beneath hospital lights and round-the-clock guards. Mariano learns this from a short paragraph buried deep in the newspaper. Riina's health failing. He reads it once, nods, and places the paper aside. For hours afterward, he says nothing. Then finally, the fire always burns itself first. Many people still think that the greatest split in Cosa Nostra history was the one between Riina and the rest, between noise and shadow, between fire and tide. So what do you think? Was Riina's war inevitable? Or did it only expose the weakness in men who feared being forgotten? Mariano never answers the question aloud, but that week he writes more than he has in months. One passage reads, "There were days I could have stopped it, could have stood, spoken, refused, but I didn't. Not out of fear, out of discipline. A tide is not a wave. It doesn't crash. It just pulls." Another, more cryptic, "We did not follow Riina. We watched him drown, slowly, violently, from the shore. He never names himself as a rebel, never calls himself brave. But the words reveal a deeper truth. Mariano Agate never believed in Riina's vision. He understood that blood had a cost too high for an empire built on continuity, and yet he didn't resist. He watched, calculated, waited, even when friends were lost, even when Sicily choked on gunpowder and headlines. Now, with decades between the carnage and the silence, Mariano no longer feels pride or regret, only understanding. The men who shouted have fallen, those who whispered still linger, and this, perhaps, is why he receives a letter that month with no return address. No paper, just a strip of linen, stained slightly with ink, written in an unsteady hand. They want to write it all down now. They want to make it history. But we lived it, brother. We didn't explain it. He holds the fabric for a long time, and beneath it, folded small and clean, is a photograph. Old, black and white. 4 men on a boat. The Marsala coastline behind them. One of them, barely 20, eyes shaded, smile subtle. Mariano. He doesn't remember the photo being taken, but he remembers the day. The wind was calm, the shipment smooth, no raised voices, just rope, crates, and sea. He folds the picture, places it inside a book of poetry, and closes it gently. Outside, the sea remains only a sound, but inside it never stopped moving. The year slides quietly into its middle months, and with it, the space around Mariano Agate seems to shift once more. Not dramatically, but subtly, like a shadow changing shape beneath the movement of clouds. He remains in his room, still alert, still present. But there's something different now in the way he watches time pass, not with urgency, with inventory, as though he's counting the final crates on the dock before the last ship sails. The facility's staff have begun to rotate. New faces arrive, fresh uniforms, younger men and women with digital clocks and newer accents. Some don't know who he is. Some do, but only through headlines and second-hand stories. One intern, tasked with managing medication schedules, studies Mariano's chart and asks the attending nurse, "What did he do?" The nurse only says he outlasted. Still, there are those who remember. One afternoon, a man in his 60s visits, dressed plainly, but his posture betrays discipline. He wears a small silver pin, nothing official, but enough to suggest government. He enters Mariano's room, does not sit. They regard each other for a long moment. Then the man says, "They're opening the Trapani files. International cooperation. Tunisia. Morocco. The old routes." Mariano nods once. They're always late to the tide. The man almost smiles. "Is there anything you want sealed?" Mariano closes his eyes briefly. Then, everything worth hiding already sank. The visitor stays a few minutes longer, says nothing else, then leaves. No one learns his name. But 2 weeks later, a set of archives in Palermo mysteriously floods during renovation. The incident is blamed on a faulty pipe. Some documents are lost. The papers barely report on it. That week, Mariano writes in his notebook, "Not every burial needs dirt. Some disappearances are simply well-timed forgettings." He's been writing less often now, more observing. The room has changed. The rosemary plant still lives, but barely. Its leaves brittle, its pot chipped. Mariano waters it anyway, every morning. Out of habit, out of hope. But something heavier lingers in the air. He's begun giving things away, quietly, deliberately. To the nurse who always remembered to bring him warm tea, he offers his old scarf, the one from Trapani, soft and gray, once worn aboard countless twilight voyages. To the quiet janitor who sweeps without ever meeting eyes, he gives a small metal compass. "Doesn't point north," he says, points toward caution. To the youngest orderly, the one who helped him move his chair by the window each afternoon, Mariano gives a folded page. No words, just a small, hand-drawn map of Sicily with a single red dot near Marsala. "Go there," Mariano says, "when you want to understand why silence matters." Still, he keeps one thing, a notebook. The last one, only 3 pages filled. Each line a different weight. Noise makes you visible. Stillness makes you last. I do not owe history my version. If the tide returns without me, let it know I waited. At night, his dreams are less vivid. But there's one that recurs. A boat on open water, sails down, floating still. He's not on it. He's watching from a cliff. The boat waits, as if for his signal. He never gives it. Not yet. One morning a priest arrives again, not the same as before. Younger, more talkative. He speaks of forgiveness, of confession, of unburdening. Mariano listens, then says, "Some men build sins, others inherit them." The priest presses gently, asking if Mariano wants absolution. Mariano's reply, "I want sleep." And so the priest leaves. The nurses begin to keep closer watch. Not from fear of loss, but out of respect. They know what the silence means now. He's not waiting for death. He's watching for it, like a sailor scanning the horizon. Not afraid, just curious. One evening, as the rain taps lightly against the windows and the facility settles into its nighttime hush, a nurse finds him looking out at nothing. "What are you thinking of?" she asks. He doesn't turn, just says, "I remember the weight of a good net, and how you never know if it's full until you pull it in." She doesn't respond, just stays. And in that silence, they share something larger than conversation. Because Mariano Agate is no longer shaping empires. He's weighing the echoes they left. The summer comes slow to Sicily that year, as though even the seasons are unsure whether to continue. In the hills near Trapani, the air hangs heavier. The breeze doesn't hum, it holds its breath. Inside the facility, Mariano Agate rises a little later each morning, but still he rises. He now moves with the cadence of memory, not walking to reach, but to recall. Every step is a callback, a shoreline re-walked in the mind. The staff treats him less as a patient and more as an artifact. He is, by now, part of the furniture of the place, a quiet constant, a living question. He speaks less, writes almost not at all, but when he does, it cuts clean. They study us like architecture, forgetting we once moved like weather. He receives a visitor in early June, a woman, middle-aged, clean lines in her coat, but tired eyes. She introduces herself simply. My father worked the port. You paid off his debt. He never knew who did. Mariano nods once. I wanted to say thank you, she adds, voice trembling. You already did, he says. She pauses, unsure whether to stay. She does. They sit for 20 minutes without speaking again. At the end, she leaves behind a small tin of sardines, hand-packed, sealed with wax, from Marsala. He doesn't open it, just places it on the shelf beside the rosemary. The sea continues to reach him in fragments. One evening, the local television in the ward plays a special on organized crime. The Dons Who Vanished. The program flashes old photos across the screen. Rena, Provenzano, Greco, and Agate. The image is from decades ago. He looks like a statue someone forgot to sculpt all the way. Shadowed eyes, firm mouth, face unreadable. The staff glance nervously at him as it plays. He doesn't flinch. When the program ends, one nurse, braver than most, asks, Was it strange seeing yourself like that? Mariano responds, Only when they get the lighting wrong. Laughter ripples, short, honest. It's one of the last times they hear him laugh. In his room, the rosemary has finally wilted. He doesn't replace it. Instead, he lays the old scarf across the windowsill and sits beside it. Every evening, watching light fade, sometimes he closes his eyes and breathes deeply through his nose, as if tasting salt in the air. A guard once asked him what he was remembering. Nothing, Mariano said. I'm listening for the things I forgot. Still, letters come, rare now, mostly unsigned, some poetic, some practical. One contains only a single sentence. Your vineyard has become a retreat for quiet men. They tend the grapes like prayer. Another, we walked the old route again. The coast still bends in your favor. He reads each slowly, then burns them in the small tin tray by his bed. Always, no souvenirs, only sensation. One afternoon, an ambitious journalist writes requesting an interview. She offers money, offers protection, offers the chance to clarify the record. The response, dictated by Mariano to the nurse, is brief. The record was silence. Clarification is noise. She never writes again. The days shorten. Summer turns sideways. A storm lashes the coast one weekend, and a tree is struck down behind the facility. Mariano watches it fall from his window. That night, he dreams of an old boat breaking free from its moorings. Not drifting away, just waiting. Unanchored. In the margins of his notebook, he writes, Some things do not leave. They simply wait until we do. The following week, something shifts. He begins giving away his last possessions. The map drawn years ago, gifted to the janitor's son. The old photograph of 4 young smugglers on a boat, taped to the back of his closet door, left without comment. The bottle of seawater remains, untouched. He begins sleeping longer. The staff check him more frequently now. One nurse begins keeping a journal of her own, documenting the final observations. Not clinical, human. She writes, he is already more echo than voice. When he speaks, it's like a bell rung deep underwater. During one of his last lucid evenings that summer, Mariano surprises everyone. He asks to sit in the courtyard, under the stars. They roll out a blanket. Make tea. Set a chair beneath the fig tree. He sits quietly, looking up. The stars don't remember us, he says. But the sea does? He nods once, and then adds, the sea forgets nothing. It just waits until we've stopped listening to whisper everything back. By autumn of 2005, the walls no longer seem like confinement. They feel more like cloth, thin, breathable, loose at the edges. Mariano Agate, once a man whose name was spoken in code across continents, now moves through his final days with the grace of a man who doesn't need anything else to be written. Even the facility has changed around him. Staff rotate in hushed reverence when they come near. No one calls him Don. No one calls him prisoner. They simply say Mariano, like you'd say the name of a street you walked every day as a child. Familiar, worn, but sacred in its repetition. His routine has become sacred too. Mornings are slow. A small wash. Tea. No more writing. Not lately. His hands ache too much, but he still gestures with them, tracing unseen routes across the bedsheets, tapping out the rhythm of old ship schedules on the armrest of his chair. He no longer asks for the sea sounds on the radio. They're inside now, he says when a nurse offers to turn it on. What he means is this. He doesn't need to hear it. The waves move through him anyway. One evening, during a storm, the lights flicker. A new guard apologizes to him. Sorry, Senor Agate. The generator's been acting up. Mariano replies, let it go dark. I've navigated worse. And he sits in the dim corridor like he's back in a boat. Lantern flickering. Horizon gone. Many people still think that Mariano Agate's greatest gift was logistics. His uncanny ability to move product through customs, police raids, international lines. But what do you think? Was it the roots or the rhythm? The way he seemed to always be exactly as loud or as quiet as the moment required. Because now he doesn't need to hide. Everyone who needed to remember already does. And those who don't, let them read books. Let them listen to half-truths. They'll never find the tide chart he carried in his breath. His body shrinks further. The strong shoulders of his youth are gone. His voice rasps more than it speaks. But his eyes remain sharp. One nurse brings in a visitor one day. A boy. 12, maybe 13. She says he's her nephew. Likes stories. Dreams of being a sailor. Mariano watches the boy watch him, then says, you know what sailors learn first? The boy shakes his head. Which winds you can lean into and which will take your name before your ship. The boy says nothing, but he doesn't forget it. Later, the nurse tells Mariano that her nephew asked if he was a pirate. Mariano smiles. No, pirates take. I made things move. She doesn't correct him. The priest returns, the young one from months before. Wiser now, still hopeful, he asks again about confession. Mariano waves his hand softly. No need, but you've seen so much. Then let me keep it, Mariano says. Some men carry their past like a chain. I carried mine like a tide. Same weight, different direction. That night, he doesn't sleep. He sits in his chair until morning. When the sun rises, he whispers, Trepani's already awake. They start early on Thursdays. No one had told him the day of the week. Later, the nurse finds a note folded on the table beside his tea. The silence after you speak is more honest than the words. That becomes his final written sentence. In the days that follow, he begins to drift more often. Moments of stillness become hours. Sometimes he seems to be speaking, but his lips barely move. Just a breath, forming words that don't need witnesses. One orderly, walking past in the dusk, overhears something. Anchors set. That same night, lightning flashes far out over the sea. Distant, but clear. No thunder, just light. Inside, Mariano is resting. His breathing shallow but calm. The rosemary plant is gone now, replaced with a small, flat stone taken from the Marsala shore. One of the nurses brought it without fanfare. She never explained why. She didn't need to. It sits by the window, warmed by the afternoon sun. Beside it, the sealed tin of sardines remains unopened, and so does Mariano, not because he's refusing to leave, but because he's still listening, to see if the sea will speak first. By the time the leaves begin falling in earnest, and the late autumn rains darken the Sicilian soil, Mariano Agate becomes more myth than man inside the walls that now hold him. He barely speaks, barely eats, but when his eyes open, they remain steady, unclouded, curious, and impossibly alert for someone whose body is so clearly fading. He sleeps more now, but when he wakes, he remembers everything. There's no confusion in him, no dementia, just long stretches of silence that feel purposeful, like the breath before an oath. One morning, the head nurse gently asks, "What are you thinking about?" Mariano doesn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, he says, "I'm remembering the smell of ropes drying in the sun. It's not nostalgia, it's geography, a kind of internal map, retraced daily." The other residents of the facility, some coherent, some not, have taken to watching him, as if his quiet is contagious. The dining hall gets quieter when he enters. Fewer television sets are turned on in his wing. No one asks him to join card games. They know better. He carries something invisible and they can all feel it. But the guards, they've softened too. One leaves a book by his bedside. Stories of old Sicily. Mariano flips through it slowly, without expression, then sets it aside. The next morning, the same guard finds a note tucked inside. History is a mirror that forgot who looked into it. The note is unsigned. Of course, there's a shift happening beneath the surface. A slow gathering of recognition among those who've been around him longest. They can feel it. He is preparing, not for death. He doesn't seem interested in that word. He's preparing for departure. There's a difference. One afternoon, he asks the nurse to open the window. The air is cold. Rain is coming. She hesitates. "You'll get chilled." "Good," he says. "Let the sea in." The wind spills into the room. It smells faintly of brine and wet stone. Mariano closes his eyes and breathes deeply. "I'd forgotten that smell," he whispers. That night, in his sleep, he murmurs names no one knows. Not famous names, not capos or judges or smugglers. Just names. Sandro, Cosimo, Pina, the twins from Marsala, names that probably never made the papers, but names that mattered to him. One of the nurses, Maria, the one who's worked there longest, starts collecting the scraps of paper he no longer writes on. Empty, yes, but she feels they still carry something. She stores them in a small envelope labeled simply salt. The rumor starts among the staff that Mariano's going to die soon, but it doesn't feel grim. It feels inevitable, like the end of a tide. His body is slowing. Movements take longer. Some days he doesn't rise at all, but when he does, he always looks to the sea, or where the sea would be, if he could still see it. In a rare moment of conversation, the new facility director, ambitious, pressed shirt, shoes too clean, asks him a question. "Mr. Agate, would you like your family contacted?" Mariano looks at him with something between pity and amusement. "I sent them silence. Let them keep it." Another time, a young therapist tries to coax a confession. "Do you believe in redemption?" Mariano sips his tea. "I believe in tides. They always return what you tried to bury." No more questions are asked after that. And yet, not everything is fading. There's still correspondence. A single letter arrives, hand-delivered by a woman who refuses to give her name. It's addressed simply, "To the old man on the hill." Inside is a page of music notation, a folk song, old, Sicilian. No lyrics, just a melody, one he hasn't heard in 70 years. He hums it once, then again. By the third time, he's crying, but no one sees it, because he's humming alone. In the window, the light bends through the glass and strikes the bottle of seawater still on his shelf. The light flickers on the wall, gentle and rhythmic, like a lighthouse or a heartbeat. Later that week, a doctor from Palermo arrives for a routine medical review. He checks vitals, reviews the charts, asks Mariano, almost as an afterthought, "Is there anything you need?" Mariano's voice is almost gone now, but he answers, "Tell them I'm not gone. I'm just listening deeper." The doctor doesn't understand. He writes down, "Patient alert, quiet, no requests." But the staff know what it means. Mariano is still reading the waves, waiting for one final current. And when it comes, he will not fight it. He'll lean into it, just like he always has. The final winter creeps in gently, with no announcement. The trees outside the hospice sway in slow motion. The facility heating rattles during the nights. The salt in the wind feels heavier, and the staff walk quieter now, as if unwilling to disturb a current, too old and too sacred to redirect. Mariano Agate remains, but less of him is visible each day. He speaks only when necessary, eats less than a bird, sleeps like a man preserving energy for a voyage no one else can see. Inside his room, the corners are clean. No clutter. Only a small table, a chair, the rosemary pot, now just dry stems, the sardine tin still unopened, and the sea bottle, collecting the last of the light that slips through the late afternoon window. He is at times unreachable, not unconscious, just deep beneath the surface, like something submerged. One nurse, Carla, the one who now reads his old notebooks in secret, asks gently, "Would you like a priest again?" He blinks slowly, then softly. No confessions, just coordinates. The staff understand now that he's drifting, not away, but inward, deep into himself, into the long current he charted for decades. They don't interfere, they let him. But outside, in the legal offices of Palermo, noise rises again. A new wave of prosecutors, eager and clean-shaven, begin reopening sealed investigations. There's a movement, young judges seeking to close the chapter on the old Sicilian web. Some of them are sharp. Some just want headlines. They mention Agate in memos, old routes, Tunisians, boats in the 1980s. But none dare pursue too far, because the evidence is fog, the witnesses ghosts, and the man himself is now a breath in a hospice chair with no interest in speaking. And yet, he still watches. One evening, during his routine at the window, a nurse comments on the lights from a nearby village. They say it's grown 3 times the size in the past decade. Mariano's voice, dry as paper. "Yes, but the fish market is smaller." She blinks. "You've been there?" He nods. "Twice. Before the baker died." She smiles. "When was that?" 1978. They say nothing after that. His memory remains crystalline, even as his body thins like vellum. The staff begin rotating shifts to ensure someone is always nearby. But Mariano never calls, never rings the bell. If he needs something, he waits until it is offered. And if it's not, he does without. The sea taught him that. At night, he dreams of maps, folds them in his sleep. Once muttered, "Send the last shipment around Sardinia. Weather's wrong for straight crossing." Another time, he whispers a name. Luciano. No context, just the name floated on breath. When he wakes, he does not explain. But in his final notebook, untouched for days, a new line appears in unsteady handwriting. "He forgave me too soon." Nobody knows what it refers to. They don't ask. Around this time, an old man arrives at the facility, frail, coughing, unknown to the staff. He claims to be a cousin, though no records confirm it. They allow him a brief visit. The man enters the room. They speak in low Sicilian, old dialect, impossible to follow. Mostly pauses, mostly silences filled with breath and eyes. Then the man leaves, saying only, "He remembers the wind better than I do." Later, The receptionist finds a folded napkin left on the lobby counter. On it, a tide never judges the ships it carries. The staff, by now, have created a routine of collecting these fragments. They've begun calling it the Salt Archive, a folder of phrases, dried leaves, empty pages, and unsent letters. The director doesn't approve, but he doesn't stop it either. One nurse proposes recording Mariano, just his voice, even a few sentences, for history. The others say no, history doesn't deserve him. Not like this, because this isn't a man giving testimony. This is a man becoming landscape. On December 21st, a heavy rain sets in. It drums against the windows. The gutters overflow. Inside, Mariano sleeps. His breath is shallow, regular. He wakes only once, just after midnight. The room is dark. A single candle flickers near the wall. He whispers, "Lower the sails," then closes his eyes again, and does not speak for 2 days. The facility grows quiet in a way even silence feels too loud to describe. Staff tiptoe. Patients murmur. The priest walks past the door once, pauses, then keeps walking, because some prayers don't require witnesses, only water. The morning of December 23rd begins with frost along the wrought iron rails outside the hospice. The lemon trees lining the coastal road are bare, and even the pigeons keep low to the ground, feathers fluffed against the creeping Sicilian chill. Inside the hospice, the staff walk with practiced care, shoes soft, voices hushed, movements intentional. Room 11 is quiet. Mariano Agate has not stirred since the night he whispered, "Lower the sails." His breath continues, shallow and spaced, like the tide breathing out slowly over a quiet shore. No family has come. No flowers arrive. Only the wind, curling through the window's edge, bearing a faint trace of seaweed and cold stone. Nurse Carla, the longest serving in the ward, sits beside him now during her break. No clipboard, no task, just presence. She places an old cassette player on the table, borrowed from storage, and plays a tape labeled simply Mare Vecchio, an old fisherman's song, no lyrics, just a mournful violin drawn like thread over dusk. Mariano doesn't move, but something in his jaw relaxes. Carla whispers, more to herself than to him, "You remember that one, don't you?" No answer, but it doesn't matter, because his face, though lined and pale, no longer looks burdened. There is no tension, only that peculiar, sacred stillness that precedes something beyond speech. And somewhere deep within his memory, perhaps beyond memory, he walks barefoot on the sand near Marsala again. He feels the calloused planks of the old dock beneath him. The air is crisp. A younger man lifts crates onto a boat named Lucentezza. He nods. They set sail. A hallucination? Perhaps, but also perhaps a remembering, a return. Meanwhile, across Sicily, the last embers of his legacy continue to glow faintly. In Palermo, a retired magistrate reads of his condition in the papers. He sighs, folds the newspaper, and says aloud to no one in particular, "The sea is closing around him. We won't see another like him." In Trapani, a former associate, now a winemaker, stares at a photograph in his cellar. 4 men, 1 woman, a party, 1973. Mariano at the center, laughing, glass in hand. The winemaker turns the photo over, written in faded ink, "We only borrow the tide." In Tunisia, a smuggler now turned grandfather tells his eldest son, "He taught me more than any priest ever did. If he goes, light a candle facing the sea." And so, across scattered homes, a quiet ritual begins. Not public, not grand, but intimate. One man drops a coin into the sea. Another pours a small bottle of grappa into the sand. A woman walks along the beach barefoot at dawn. They don't say his name, but they remember him, not as a don, not as a criminal, as something older, as a presence. Back in room 11, The bottle of seawater has begun to cloud. It had remained clear for years, but now silt swirls gently within. Nurse Carla notices, frowns, and whispers, "It's moving again." She doesn't tell anyone. Some things don't belong in reports. And Mariano? He's drifting now. Breath slower, longer pauses. At one point, he opens his eyes and mouths something. Carla leans close. He repeats it. "All ships go home." She doesn't understand it fully, but she writes it down and adds it to the salt archive. Later that day, the hospice director, pressed for time and uncomfortable with the weight in the air, stops by for exactly 1 minute. He looks at Mariano, nods once, says, "Safe passage, sir," and leaves without signing any paperwork. That night, a strong wind rises over the coast. It rattles the shutters. It carries gull cries farther inland than usual, and in his sleep, Mariano smiles faintly. One final current, one last pull. December 24th arrives with no fanfare, no bells, no hymns, only a thin mist curling over the coastal fields and an ocean that lies still, as if it, too, is holding its breath. Inside the hospice, the morning staff rotate in, shoulders tight, eyes already casting glances toward room 11. The night nurse leaves a brief note in the handover log. Vitals faint but present. No movement since 2:12 a.m. No words. They don't expect much change. But none of them are prepared for the silence that now waits beyond that door. Not just quiet, something deeper. As if the room itself has surrendered its sound, Carla enters with her coffee and pauses in the doorway. Mariano lies as he has for days now, still face turned toward the window. But the candle on the side table has gone out, and so has he. There is no struggle, no gasp, no moment of drama, just absence. A gentle final tide. She stands beside him for a long while. Doesn't check the pulse. She already knows, and for reasons she'll never quite articulate, she doesn't call anyone. Not right away. Instead, she sits beside him, pours a second cup of coffee, and places it gently on the table, beside the unopened sardine tin and the cloudy sea bottle. "Merry Christmas, Don Mariano." There are no tears, just stillness and quietly gratitude, because whatever else he had been in his life, storm, architect, criminal, ghost, here at the end, he had become something else entirely. He had become a rhythm. Outside, the waves begin to move again, small at first, then stronger. The sea returning to its work. It's hours before they officially record the time of death. 8:47 a.m. No family claims the body. No media reports the moment. The obituary, written by an overworked hospital clerk, reads, "Mariano Agate, age 82, passed peacefully. No known next of kin. Former maritime merchant. Burial pending." But of course that's not entirely true. There are dozens, no, hundreds of men and women across southern Europe who still carry the weight of a name whispered with reverence or fear. Some knew him in business, some in silence, some only through stories passed in dockside bars. A few light candles, some make offerings to the sea. One man in Naples writes a single phrase on a restaurant napkin and leaves it tucked inside a bottle. He taught the ocean how to wait. The staff hold a small service 2 days later. No priest, just Carla reading aloud passages from the salt archive. One nurse plays the violin tape again. Another places a small shell on the coffin, taken from the beach below Marsala. When the time comes for the cremation, Carla hesitates. Instead, she requests a burial. The hospice director, moved for reasons he doesn't explain, approves it, and so they bury him on a small plot behind the facility, facing west toward the water. No stone, just a wooden marker. It reads, "Monsieur Agate, 1931, 2013, returned to Tide." Later, a former associate visits the grave. He leaves a bottle of aged red wine and a note, for the one who turned silence into currency. A month passes, then 2. Life forgets him. Almost. But in a small bar near the port of Marsala, an old sailor tells a story to a boy with wide eyes. There was once a man who knew the sea so well. He could predict storms by taste. They say he vanished one winter without leaving a single wake. The boy asks, was he a pirate? The old man chuckles. No, lad, he was the storm. Winter loosens its grip on Sicily with the quiet reluctance of a man handing over the last coin in his pocket. By February, the winds along the Marsala coast turn softer, and the lemon trees, once skeletal in their patience, begin to blush with new buds. Life hums forward, but not all stories obey the season. Some drift, some linger. A full 2 months after Mariano Agate's burial, a fisherman named Pietro finds himself grounded by engine trouble near Isola di Levanzo. He's alone, too poor to afford a deckhand, too stubborn to give up his boat. As the tide pulls back, revealing scars on the island's underbelly, Pietro waits. He lights a cigarette, opens a flask, and listens, because sometimes, when the sea is low and the wind forgets its pace, you can hear things it isn't supposed to say. Whispers in the rustle of rope, in the moan of tired wood, in the hush between waves. That's when he hears it. A voice, not loud, not distinct, just a rhythm, a cadence he remembers from his father's stories. A certain cadence that once quieted rooms, settled disputes, and unstrung even the boldest threats. Pietro stands, heart knotted, and peers toward the mainland. Marsala. He doesn't see anything, but he nods. Still out there, huh? A week later, he visits the hospice and finds Carla tending to the garden. She's older now, shoulders a little more stooped, but still steady in her movements. He hands her a photograph, faded and crumpled. It's of a young Agate standing aboard the Lucentezza, smiling in a way few ever saw him. The kind of smile you wear before the world teaches you how much it costs. Carla studies it. You knew him? Pietro shrugs. He saved my father once, smuggled him out before a sweep. Never asked for payment. They sit in silence for a while, the photo between them like a relic. Carla finally says, you want to see where he rests? He nods. Together, they walk past the back gate, across the gravel to the wooden marker. Someone has carved a wave beneath the name. No one admits to doing it. Pietro kneels, places a folded paper beneath the shell. When Carla later opens it, it reads, "The tide never forgot you." Meanwhile, in Palermo, a young professor researching organized crime for her thesis stumbles upon the Salt Archive. She's skeptical at first, assuming it's just another eccentric collection of myths. But the further she reads, the more she senses something rare. Truth smuggled in whispers. One entry haunts her. He feared peace more than war. At least war gave him a shape. She includes it in her thesis, anonymously cited, of course. Academia frowns upon poetry dressed as fact. Across the Strait of Gibraltar, a retired Interpol officer named Charles returns to a journal he'd kept in the 1990s. Half-coded notes, maritime charts, strange sketches of supply routes that seem to move like shadows. He flips through, page by page, until he lands on a single entry, Marsala. Watch the coast, not the ports. That's where ghosts dock. He closes the book, smiles, and pours a glass of scotch. To Agate, maybe? Or maybe to the years spent chasing something that always stayed one tide ahead. Meanwhile, the sea continues its work. It chews at forgotten docks. It smooths over footsteps. It swallows secrets with the patience of gods. And every so often, a crate washes ashore, sealed tight, salt-bitten, filled with nothing but sand and a small brass token shaped like a crescent wave. No one claims them. No one understands them. But the old ones, the ones who remember, simply nod and say, "He's keeping count." In that, Mariano Agate remains. Not alive, Not gone, just submerged. Spring arrives on the Sicilian coast with more confidence than it deserves. Brash skies, unruly bursts of wisteria, and an impatient sun reclaiming its dominance. In Marsala, the tourists begin to trickle back, drawn by wine, whispers, and waves. Most will never know the history beneath their sandals. Most will never feel the weight of those cobbled alleys once used to transport silence. But a few still remember. They remember the man who moved shipments without radar, the man who taught lieutenants to listen to fog, the one who, in the end, didn't die famous, but vanished like the last note of a song played only once. In a small trattoria not far from the shore, an aging waiter slides a bowl of pasta across a table and nods to a quiet man reading a local paper. "Used to be a man," he says softly, "who made the whole port move without moving his lips." The quiet man glances up, says nothing. But when he leaves, he drops a folded page under his plate. The waiter unfolds it later. It's a clipping from 1987, an article about a record heroin seizure in Spain. Circled in pen. Vessel changed course 72 hours prior. No captain on board, just a note beneath it. Mariano taught the sea how to steer itself. Elsewhere, Carla retires from the hospice. She moves to a cottage just outside Trapani, overlooking a quiet inlet. She doesn't tell anyone, but every evening, she walks to the water's edge and places a small object in the tide. A stone, a matchbox, a page from the salt archive, and watches it disappear. One night, a wave rolls in and leaves something behind. A bottle. Inside, a single strip of film, faded but visible. Mariano, seated on the lucentezza, hand extended toward the camera, grinning. She smiles, and this time she weeps. There is a cafe in Naples where old smugglers gather. They play chess, talk politics, and once in a while raise a glass to Il Don di Mare. They don't use his real name, too heavy, too holy. Instead, they nod toward the sea and say, "He's checking the ropes." In Palermo, a crime journalist finally publishes a long-rumored piece, "The Man Who Knew When to Disappear." It traces Mariano Agate's life through fragments, court records, shipping logs, testimonies from men long buried or long afraid. The article barely trends. Too quiet, too subtle, too respectful. But in the final paragraph she writes, "If you stand on the Marsala shore just after dusk, and the tide pulls back exactly so, they say you'll hear the echo of a man who never shouted, a man who made silence profitable, a man who left this world the way a wave leaves, without apology, but with form." Back at the grave, the wooden marker has been replaced, not by order, not by city, just by hand. Now, etched in simple brass, Mariano Agate, 1931-2013. Il mare. Ricorda tutto. The sea. Remembers everything. A small bench faces the plot. A young boy sits there one morning, sketching boats in a spiral notebook. His grandfather stands nearby, watching the tide. "Why does the sea make that sound?" the boy asks. The old man replies without hesitation, "It's still whispering his name." The boy looks puzzled. "Who?" The man doesn't answer, just pats his shoulder and says, "Come on, let's walk." And so they do. Down the gravel path, toward the rising sun, toward a day that will carry its own rhythm. The grave behind them waits without impatience. It has time, it has tide, and it has stories. Now, listener, if you're still with us, just breathe. Let the hush of those final waves wash over whatever thoughts remain. Picture the port towns at dusk. Those tired buildings kissed by salt, the air heavy with brine and memory. See the old chairs left outside storefronts, where shadows gather and stories pause. Let your mind wander gently, like the driftwood bobbing between truths and tales. Because not all endings are loud. Some step away in soft shoes, some leave their legacy wrapped in fog. Mariano Agate didn't ask to be remembered. He simply made himself unforgettable in the spaces between noise, between what was seen and what was felt when no one was looking. Tonight, as you close your eyes, think of the sea not as distance, but as witness. It watched him rise, it watched him fade, and it still carries his name in ripples, tucked deep in currents where secrets sleep. So rest easy now. Let the rhythm of the tide slow your breath. Let the salt in the air settle softly on your thoughts. And if you dream of ships with no sails, or men who whisper commands into wind, you'll know exactly where they learned it.